Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SCM Connections web seminar, The Core Interface, Key Understandings from Implementation to Troubleshooting, presented by partner and solutions architect Claudio Gonzalez. I'm Megan Brewer, the facilitator for today's event, and if you have any technical problems during today's session, I'm the one you want to send messages to. It should be the chat panel on your screen. Claudio will also be taking questions at the end of today's session using the Q&A panel that's found on your screen. And if you don't mind holding off on questions until the end, that would be great, just so that we get through all this great content. A little bit about SCM Connections before we start. You probably already know that we're a supply chain management consulting firm. We specialize in advanced planning and optimization. Our consultants are experienced supply chain professionals who bring real-world implementation experience with global companies to our projects. We combine strategy, process, people, and technology to design an integrated process to give your organization the right answers to the right questions at the right time. And for more information, you can check out scmconnections.com, our updated website as of the last couple of weeks. We're really excited about that. Our presenter today is Claudio Gonzalez. He's a partner and solutions architect at SCM Connections. He brings 14 years of SAP experience and specializes in advanced planning and optimization, supply network planning, the core interface, demand planning, and production planning and detailed scheduling. Claudio is a #1 ranked speaker at multiple SAP Insider events, and he's a recipient of the SAP Service Excellence Award for Outstanding Consulting. And he's got a great reputation as a speaker, implementer, and solutions architect in SAP APO. Before we get started here, let's get a couple of polls out so we can just kind of see who's in the room. Just a minute here. I know that we've got a couple of people who have just joined us. We'll get those going on. And if you look at, let's see here, if you can answer those questions on your screen, what role do you play at your organization, just so that we can kind of get an idea of who's in the room here. A, consultant, B, head of master data integration, C, planning, D, basis administration, and E, other. And then also, if you can answer that second question there, how familiar are you with the CIF? A, somewhat, or A, very, B, somewhat, C, limited, and D, none. We got half of our responses in. We'll give it about another 15 seconds. Great. Okay. Thank you. And it looks like I will share these results with you, and you can see that most of the people in the room here are consultants, and they're very familiar with the CIF, so that's great. Excellent. Okay. And without any further ado, we will turn this over to Claudio.
Well, thank you, Megan. I appreciate that introduction. So as Megan mentioned, my name is Claudio Gonzalez. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the CIF today. And let me start going to my first slide here. Just so you know, what I did is I present every year in the SAP Insider event. And looking at the polls, I've noticed that most of you are coming from consulting. And one of the things that I did notice is that we don't get a lot of consultants at the SAP Insider event. Mostly the ones that we do get are because are there from a sales point of view. And I think this kind of sessions are important for consultants as well. So that's why we want to have this type of webinars, right? To be able to spread the word, not only to clients, which is very important, but as well as all the consultants. So the presentation that I gave at the SAP Insider is a presentation that we actually have here today, minus the $1,500, access fee. So you guys can have a really excellent deal today. So let's go ahead and, since we only have an hour, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to tell you a little bit what we're going to cover. First, the CIF overview. We're going to go a little bit into understanding what kind of master intersectional data transfers between ECC and APO. We're going to be talking about how to best create and optimize the creation of integration models, difference between real-time and periodic transfer of data. And then we're going to get into a little more of debugging options, what the CIF Cockpit can actually do for you, and what kind of user exits are there available. Since it seems from the poll that most of you are familiar with the CIF, I will try to go quicker on the first half of the presentation, and then spend a little more time on the actual debugging, which is what a lot of people are interested on. So let's just go ahead here and get started. So just a brief introduction, right, of APO. Hopefully everybody has APO. If you don't, then you really don't need the CIF and you don't have to be here. But if you do have APO, at least at the right now, you do need the CIF. So APO, as everybody knows, is a primary planning tool that SAP has for advanced planning. If we talk standard business scenario of execution, right, like MM, SD, LES, all the stuff is actually housed in ERP or ECC or R3, whatever you want to call it, depending on when you start implementing it, how many years ago. The ERP system provides the relevant planning data for APO. And what we mean by relevant is anything related to master data and also anything related to transactional data. The products are planned in APO, and then the planning results are transferred back to the ERP system, okay, via what we call the CIF. This can be done either directly, immediately, or it can be done periodically. I'll go to the next slide. So what is the core interface? So the interface is actually the tool that is used to transfer the master and transactional data. And it can be used to transfer from multiple ERP systems to a single APO system, or vice versa too. You can have one single ERP system where you can connect to multiple APO systems. So what are the actual main tasks that the APO delivers? Well, first, it allows you to determine a source and target system. It'll provide with that master and transactional data, the transfer of changes, and then also when you're planning on the APO side, it allows you to send those planning results back to ECC. So what are some of the tools that the CIF will provide you? Well, the integration model, which we're going to have a whole section talk about that, on how we can send the data, how we can create the model, and how do you basically break the data down to send into APO, and then the planning data back to ECC. We're also going to be talking about the techniques of the initial and incremental and real data transfer between ECC and APO. And then the other thing that SAC provides is the alerting, right? This is the key. It's able to tell you when you have an issue and when the issue may be. Of course, as if you work with the CIF in the past, you'll know that some of the messages that it gives you are very scripted and not very intuitive, so you really don't know right off the bat what the issue may be unless you worked on it in the past, or you have some of the tools that I will provide you today. Okay, so when we talk about the APO integration process, okay, first we talk about general settings. You create your RFC links. You basically connect the CIF in the system. Then you design it, right? You say, okay, what kind of data I want to send over? What are the integration models that I'm going to create? And then after that, after you create that, then you have to maintain it, right? You got to send the data over first, and after you send the data over, you have a maintenance that you have to do every so often. Which is basically in a daily level. And then after that, you have kind of like the monitoring of the data going back and coming forth. What are the issues that you may have that all falls under monitoring. So it's all a big cycle. Today, we're going to concentrate on the design structure, on the initial data transfer, on the incremental data transfer, and in the monitoring. So these 4 boxes we're going to concentrate on today. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the master and transactional data. Okay, all right. So if you work with APO, you'll know that APO works with models and versions. The active model in APO is called 000, and the active version is called 000. The version is basically the type of planning data that you can have. So for example, you can have a version 000 which interacts with ECC, but then you can have a version 11 or version 12 or whatever you want to call it, as long as it's three-letter code or three-letter and number code, which you can only do for simulation planning. Now, that data will not send information back to ECC. Only the active version does. Okay, so always remember that. Okay, so if you worked in ECC a long time, you're probably familiar with what's called a material master. You're dealing with plant and work centers and recipes or bombs. Well, in APO, SAP decided to call it something different. So a material in APO is a product, a plant are called locations, work centers are called resources, and then the combination of a recipe and a bomb is what we call your PPM, your production process model, or your PDS, your production data structure. So again, it's the same thing, just different naming convention. The master data in APO, the product master data in APO, is basically defined in two levels: a global master data, which is basically non-location specific, and then you have your location-specific master data, right? Like lot sizing, production horizon, anything that will have to be defined at a location level. Okay, so when we talk about that master data, right, we are able to send anything that's a plant, customer, vendor, that will all come over to APO as a location. So the first is an initial transfer, and then you send what we call incremental data transfer, which basically what that means is that the location per se is already in APO, but once you make a change to that location, then that incremental change will go over as well. As I mentioned before, the material master will come as a product, capacity work setting will come over as a resource, routing and bill of material will come over as a PPDS or PPM, again as an initial and incremental transfer. So the location types in APO are plant, distribution center, customer, suppliers. These are the ones that we mostly use. There are actually more than that. Not all of them do transfer to APO. So beware of certain ones that you're going to see, but not all of them do transfer. So, for example, subcontracting location, even though you can do subcontracting planning, the actual location type subcontracting is an APO type location. Let me go here one more time. Next. Okay, so from a product master perspective, one thing to notice is most of the fields that come over from ECC to APO are fields that are housed in the MRP views. So if you remember MRP1, MRP2, MRP3, those are the ones that will come over to APO, and they come over to APO. APO has its own tabs, right? So you're going to have an administration tab, a unit measure, SMP2, SMP1. So you're going to have fields that are directly linked to those fields on the ECC side, and they're going to fall in the product master data. But just remember that they don't go all in one single screen, so you're going to have to go through multiple tabs to see them. Okay. From a resource master data, resources come over to APO. The resources that come over to APO are usually used for SMP, which is supply network planning. And then you have PPDS, which is production planning and detailed scheduling. The resources can come over as what we call a bucket resource or a single and multi-activity resource. So a bucket resource is basically dealt when you're talking about when it's not order-based, which is a bucket-based, which is basically daily, weekly, or monthly, which is what SMP plans on. A single multi-activity resource goes down to the order level, which is what we call time continuous. Now, one of the first steps that I'm probably going to give you now is that when you do send that over to APO, we usually recommend that you send it as a single mix or multi-mix resource. And the reason why we say that is because when you send a resource like that, then it gets created in such a way that it can be used for both SMP and PPDS. So I'm going to show you in the later slides how to configure that in transaction CF C9. Okay. From a PPM, the PPMs get created in APO, again, as a combination of the BOM and the routings. there's a lot of wording here in the slide. All you really need to know, again, is a combination of your volume and your writing. So basically your throughput, that comes over to APO. One thing to take into consideration is that a PPDS, at least up until version 7.0, enhancement pack 2, I want to say, you couldn't make changes in APO for PDSs, but you can for PPM. So just keep that into account when you're trying to decide what to use. Obviously, also, since PDSs was what SAP implemented later releases, this is any type of enhancements that were done to that particular object were only basically implemented for PDSs, and PPM, they left it as is. So there's not much more new functionality you're going to see on PPMs. Okay, so this is, again, from a PDS perspective. One of the big advantages on the PDS side when they come over to APO through CIF is that you can directly have an SMP PDS. You don't have to go through a conversion process where you have with PPMs. PPMs come over as a PPDS PPM, which you have to convert them to an SMP PPM. Not the case with PDSs. Also, PDSs are not changeable before Enhancement Pack 2, but you can use a transaction ECC called PDS_maint, which I would allow you to further configure the PDS, especially if you're using for optimizer purposes, if you want to use ghosting and such. Okay, so just a couple of master data tricks. Distribution centers, okay? In ECC, everything is a plant, but if you go to SPRO and follow the specific menu path here on SPRO, you should be able to define what's called a node type. So if it's actually a distribution center, you can define that as an actual distribution center, so that when it comes over to APO, it won't show us a plant, but it will actually show us a DC. Also, if you are using goods receipt time, you got to be sure that you create a handling resource in the location master in APO so that the system can schedule it properly during planning. So GR times do come over to APO, but in APO you do need a handling time to be created. And again, the handling resource can be very simple, where you basically assign it a 24-hour capacity, unlimited, but it needs to exist. If master data is maintained both in ECC and APO, you got to take measures to keep from data being overwritten. And what do I mean by that? And again, this is not the best of practices, but some clients do this, is that they don't have ECC as the system of record. So they have certain fields that say come over from a legacy system that they send directly to APO. Well, that's fine, but if that field is one of the defaults for the CIF, unless you make a change on the integration of the CIF through an enhancement saying, hey, I don't want the field to be overwritten, then the CIF will override it with whatever values on the ECC side. All right, a couple of other master data tips and tricks. The resource master, you're going to see two fields. One's called date minus and date plus. Let's concentrate on the days plus. What that field does is that when you're planning, it'll take that number of days to consider it during planning. So what is the problem with this if you just use the default? Well, the default is 180 days. So the problem with that is that when you do S&P planning and you want to do capacity planning, you usually go over 180 days, which is 6 months. You may go, say 27 months like we do with my current client. So then you want that value to be much higher. So instead of having to send the resource over and then make the updates, there's two things you can do. If you already sent it over to APO, then you can go to this table, RELCT in APO, and make the update all at once for all the resources. Or even better, before you send the resource to APO, there's again the transaction CFC9, which I'll show you, where you can make the default value to be, say, 999. So then that way you don't have to worry about making that change later. Also, capacity variant data and the resource for both SMP and PPDS. That had to be maintained directly in APO. It didn't transfer from, and actually I need to update this one because it didn't transfer from ECC, but now it does. You're going to see on the, depending on what version you are, I've seen it on ECC 6.0 and SCM 7.0. You're going to see a button called external capacity. So now you're able to send that over to APO. Before you weren't able to. So just something to keep in mind. As I mentioned also, SMP PDS is transferred directly to APO. SMP PPN has to be built. If the capacity in APO is to be planned for different resources, all materials using the resources for production must be planned in APO settings. So what do we mean by that? We basically mean that if you're going to plan a resource in APO, then it makes sense that all the materials that are planned on that resource that are also planned in APO. Because if you have a resource and you plan, say, 100 materials, but you only plan 50, then you're not really getting a true capacity of that resource in APO if you don't have all the materials there for planning. So that's just kind of like a bit of a common sense. Okay, so one of the things also to keep in mind, if you're integrated for multiple ECC systems. So let's take an example. I have ECC client 1, and this is my set of materials. Now pay attention to 222 and 5000. I'll activate the CIF, I activate my models, send the data over, and you'll see that the materials will come over to APO, not a problem. But then on my second ECC client, called number 2, I have another set of materials, and I also have the same 2 materials with the same number, the same name, right? 222 and 5000. When you try to send that over to APO, the second set of that repeats itself, 222 and 5000, will not be transferred to APO. Why is that? Well, material with the same name can only be transferred from one ECC system. And the reason why that is because this APO table creates a one-to-one relationship between the material number and the APO material ID. That material ID is that GUI that you've probably seen if you've ever been to an APO table, which is like that really ugly 40-character field that you can never memorize if you wanted to. So what will happen is that then it'll establish that link. So the next time you're trying to send the material from another ECC client, it'll say, oh, I can't do it because I already have the material linked to a GUI. So it will error out. Some people, some other consultants say, hey, we wish you could do it through the business system group, but this is not an actual differentiator. So the product master does not filter through BSG, so you can't use that. One client, what they did do is they enhanced the CIF to alter the actual material name during integration. So basically it was called, say, 222A when it came over to APO, but then what they actually had to do is, because they want to plan it together, they actually had to use hierarchical planning to aggregate and then disaggregate and then send the results back. So it wasn't a pretty solution, but they were able to do it. Hopefully nobody here has a specific scenario. Okay, now from a transactional data perspective, anything you can think of will come over to APO. Purchase order, purchase requisition, sales orders, plan orders, reservations, stocks, everything will come over first, again, as an initial transfer, then as an incremental transfer. In APO, every single order will be assigned an order type, and you have here just some of them. There are usually probably about over 100 of them. But just be sure you're familiar with each individual order type. Okay, so what do we want to know about transactional data? First is that it's bidirectional, right? Unlike master data, which is only sent from ECC to APO, transactional data is bidirectional, which means that it will go from ECC to APO and vice versa, from APO back to ECC. In order for the transactional data to flow, the integration model has to be active. There's a transaction that we're going to go over in a little bit, which is called the CIF Post-Processing. That can help anytime you have errors with transactional data. It is best if you're planning transactional data, such as plan orders and purchase requisition, right? So anything that's an order type that is related to planning, not execution, not PO or anything like that, but anything that's planning, like plan orders, PREX, reservations, is created in APO first, then allowed to transfer to ECC. So if you do have a material that you do plan in APO, right, the idea is that plan it in APO, right? Don't use MRP for materials that you do want to plan in APO. Also, SAP APO change pointers can be used to transfer the data from APO back to ECC. So what does that mean? That means that some clients want to send the data immediately after you finish planning, and some clients want to be able to first look at the planning results, make sure they make sense, and then send the data to ECC. So there's a way that you can do that through change pointers, and then transaction SAP APO/C5. That's where you actually trigger the release of the orders back to ECC. Okay, so that was again. I'll try to go quicker, but that was basically master transactional data. Now let's talk a little bit about integration models. Okay. So what is the basic definition of integration model? Integration model basically will gather together all the data that is to be transferred from ECC to APO in sections, right? Each integration model has a name and also has a logical system. That logical system will tell, on the ECC side, will tell the CIF where the data is going. So the logical system is the APO system. And there's also an APO application field, which is basically a free attribute, so you can name it whatever you want. So you basically have to use the model name and the APO application as your two fields where you will put in a name of a model that will make sense to you, right? If it's material, if you want to send a location, and so on. If you want to send purchase acquisition, that's where you're going to name it. If you have multiple APO systems, then that will require that you have multiple integration models, because each one is going to have a different logical system. So which is basically the address of that APO system. Okay, so the basic transaction that you're going to use is CFM1. This transaction is divided, and this is screenshot divided in such a way that on the left-hand side, on the top left, you're going to see all the different master data elements that you have available. On the bottom part on the left, you're going to have all the transactional data that is available. And then on the right-hand side, depending on which button you use on the left, you have the filtering options that you can send over. The overall selection here on top, that will be available for anything that you click on the left. So that will use as a filtering of what you want to send, right? So for example, if I want to send materials, I want to filter, say, only on material type XO, which is materials that are planned in, say, in APO, and MRP type, sorry, MRP type XO. And then you can also say material type, I want to send, say, finished good or WIPs. You can define that as well. So however you wanna define it. And you do want to filter it, because if you don't filter it, then you can basically create a master of a model, which will take forever to process. So make sure that you do use the filtering criteria. Okay, so which goes into the next slide, talking about best practices of integration model. One of the things that we always recommend is to segregate the objects through an increased number of integration models. It is a one-time consuming setup, meaning that you do have to sit down, you do have to think about which models you want to create. A lot of clients, what they do is they divide it by locations, right? So usually that's manageable. And one of the biggest benefits is that it'll isolate the errors and separate the good and the bad data. Now, I know that there are specific transactions now that are available in functionality that SAP has come, which is called the incremental transfer, which we're going to go on the next slides. But we have found that it's not always reliable. Sometimes, depending what the error is, it can block the whole model. So in my opinion, it's still a best practice to segregate the models. Also, what we say is a one-time activity is because you can basically create a variant which can be transported to the subsequent client. So that means that you can create all the models in development, Then you can send that over to quality, and then you can send that over to production through transport. So what the system will do is will create the actual variant and then update the logical system to be the correct system. In the insider event, they provide documentation that I basically link to the presentations. If you are interested on how to basically create those variants and be able to transport them, just let me or Megan know, and we'll send the document to you. Also, from an integration model perspective, usually what works best is to do it through the right sequencing. That means first do locations, then products, then resources, then PPMs or PDSs, right? Because you can't send a PPM or a PDS before the location the product is at, right? So there has to be a right sequence. So first send metadata, then you can send the transactional data. One thing that you could do if you wanted to, you could send products and stocks together. That works well as well. But everything else, wait until the master data is over to APO. Sales order, purchase orders, plan orders, just create individual integration model for each transactional data. Again, that's what will be working, for us by implementing it this way in the past. Okay, so once you create the integration model, right, you say this is the data that I want to send over. The next thing you want to do, you got to go to CFM2, which is the activation of the integration model. Here you still have the model name, the logical system, the application. You have transfer options. This transfer option definitely take it into consideration, especially when you're talking transactional data. Some clients have, for example, sales orders. They create hundreds of thousands of sales orders a day, so it can put a big load on the CIF. So if you create some parallelization, that can help with the processing and making it go much faster. Also, another option that you have is that plant orders, those plant orders you can either, by default, they come over as PPDS plant orders, but if you click the flag here, they can also come over as an SMP plant order. Okay, so once you are in CFM2, you basically will come in, it'll tell you the model you're trying to create. You're going to have three statuses. You're going to have the active, the inactive, which are perfectly normal, and the one that you don't want to see is the error, right, which is this yellow one here. So what you would do is you go in, it'll tell you the number of objects on that particular model. In this case, you can see it have 25 or 35. I can see it very well. My eyesight is not that great. I think it's 35. And then you will actually start the model and activate it. Okay, so if everything went well, you just get it, the activation has been processed. But what happens when you don't, right? And this is what we're going to go through during troubleshooting. Okay, so best practices of integration model implementation. One that's very important, never have data objects in more than one integration model. So what do we mean by that? We mean don't have, say you have a material master integration model for SKU1, and then you have another integration model called material master 2, where you also have SKU1 in it. That will basically mess up the CIF, and the material will, updates to that material will not go over to APO. So it's very important that you have each object on a singular integration model. And the way these things get out of hand is when you have more than one person maintaining integration models. That's when people start creating their own, and sometimes they don't realize there is another model that already has that material or that object in it. So make sure that that doesn't happen. One easy way to find out if it is happening is to go to transaction CFM5, where you actually put in, say, that material in a specific location, and then the transaction will tell you if that material exists in more than one model. If it does, you just deactivate one. So you can have more than one model activated, okay, for the same object. Okay, as I mentioned before, consider the use of parallel processing. Also consider, if you want to do full activation, try to do that as an overnight job, right, which usually you should have anyway, which is you'll have your background jobs, which are basically your CIF job, along with any planning job that you may have during the week or during the weekend. So you need to work and decide, how often you're going to activate these integration models. So during the day, if you do have to send something over to APO and you're not working with the immediate send, then what you need to do is just try to do a delta change, okay? You can also use transaction CFP1, CFP2 if you want to send the data over from APO to ECC right away through a quick delta. So basically, you don't have to go to CFM1 and CFM2. You can go to these transactions and then do a delta, and the system will just send over what's new. So if you basically have a material with a specific new values in it, then that will send it over. Now, if you have a new material that you created, which is brand new, that has to be gone through CFM1 because that material is not yet in the integration model. Okay, so this is what I was talking to you about before that, SAP came back, which was with the master data incremental load as of 7.0. I don't know how many of you have used it. We have used it, and again, it works. We found that it didn't work 100% of the time, but it does work most of the time. So basically what it will do is, for example, if I have a material master integration model with 100 materials, right, and for X reason, one of those materials or a bunch of those materials have an error in it, then what the system is made to do is that it'll send 95 of the materials that are okay, and then the other 5 will create a new line of CFM2 and then say these materials do not be sent over. So it'll basically, it's almost like you create a new integration model per se. So then you need to work on what was the issue with those 5 materials and then send them separately. This has to be activated, and the transaction here is I just put it in, is CFMINCR, and it's on the APO side. So again, it's definitely worth having it on, just I wouldn't rely on it 100%. Okay, so let's quickly talk about real-time and periodical transfer. What does that mean, right? Both master and transactional data can be transferred real-time or periodically. So in real-time environment, that means that any changes that are made on the source system will be reflected right away on the target system, okay? Right after you click Save. So in a periodic environment, the data is actually saved and then sent to the target system at a later time, right? So that's the main difference between the two. So I'm going to throw in just 3-letter words here that you're going to see in the system if you're working with this. You're going to see something called the BTE, which is Business Transaction Event, and this is when it's being referred to real-time transfer. And then you're also going to see 3 letters called ALE, which is the Application Link Enabling, and this is tied to change pointers, okay? So one thing to know is that if you are working with AMRP areas, AMRP area specific fields are only supported by ALE, which means that you have to basically reactivate the integration models to send the data over to APO. It won't get sent over after you press Save. Okay, this is something that we learned the hard way. Okay, so some of the practices between real-time and periodical. Master data changes should be sent periodically. Again, this is, I want to say this is client-specific. Why is it? Some clients, right, unless they have a business-specific way they want the data to be sent over to APO. It's because a lot of, some of the clients, what they do is they make a lot of master data changes, and a lot of master data changes they make on the ECC side, they don't have a, I want to say, great process, so they're not made correctly all the time. So what happens is if they make incorrect master data updates and you have a BTE, meaning you send the real time, well, then the master data update will go over to APO right away. So now you're potentially working with bad master data for your planning. So you could either not send it and then review the master data, or have it sent real time. Again, I'm going to leave it up to the specific client. If possible, publish APO results to ERP periodically, again, not immediately. And what that means is that let the system and APO plan, review the plan results. If the results looks like they make sense, and then send that over to APO. Again, As APO is getting more and more mature, the customers are getting more and more confident of what APO planning results are, so then they can change that to immediate. Transactional data from ECC to APO, that definitely always has to be immediately, because you do want to have the latest and the greatest, right, be sent to APO so that you're planning with the latest data. One thing that you do want to check, okay, especially when you're talking about specific objects that are touched by enhancements. There is a table called BDCP2, which will basically allow you to see how many change pointers are there for a specific object. So what do I mean by an object? So let's just say, for example, you're trying to send purchasing info records, contracts over to APO. Well, those changes will go into a what called a CIF message type SRC something or another, right? So this table will tell you how many change pointers or how many updates the system will have to do the next time you do a CIF activation to APO. So what happens if this table gets out of hand when you're talking millions of records, and this has happened in my client, then you basically, your CIF integration model will start hanging. You're basically waiting for a really long time. And the reason why this happened is not because somebody went in and just created multiple PIRs. It's because you may have an enhancement that every time it makes a change or an update or it goes in, it triggers a change pointer to this table. So you got to be sure first that your integration models are not doing that. So your enhancements are not doing that, because that can definitely impact your performance. So if you do have that, one thing you can do is you can use report RBDCPLCLR, that's a mouthful. You can use that report to delete the change pointers, okay? And then start sending the ones that really matter. Okay, so remember the CSP9 transaction I was talking to you before? Okay, so this transaction will allow you to, first, as we were talking, define the resource, if it's going to be bucket, single min, so you can define that here. That resource, days plus, days minus that we're talking about, remember I was telling you about over 180 days, you can define here this as well. And then also, you can also define here if you want the master data, transactional data, to be ALE or BTE, which is change pointers or immediately. So this is a very important transaction that you basically need to configure at the beginning of your CIF configuration. Okay. So we talked about CFP1. CFP1 again, if you want to send quickly changes over to APO for something that's already an active integration model, but you may change it, you can use CFP1. Also, if you want to send changes to MRP areas, remember I was telling you that you can't do that immediately, but you can still use CFP1 and send changes for the MRP area. Okay, all right. So if you work with the CIF, hopefully at least you took something out of this, I'm hoping. Let's go now to the debugging options, okay? And I'll try, I think I'm falling behind a bit, but let's see. Troubleshootings. As you know, if you work with the CIF, the biggest problem that you have with the CIF is troubleshooting. It takes most of the time. It's a very consuming activity. If you can, even if you're a consultant, try to preach this, the client to consider this a separate role or either assign it to an existing data role. A lot of times, master data stewards get stuck with the, with CIF functions, which is fine, a CIF role, as long as they're technically savvy, because it can be technical. There are multiple transactions that you can use for issues regarding the CIF, which we're going to go through some of them now. And depending, obviously, on the issue, data will not flow between both systems. Okay, so what are some of the transactions available? SMQ1, the outbound queue. What is this transaction? This is what we call the first line of defense. So this transaction exists both in ECC and APO. And SMQ1, the outbound, deals with data leaving the source system, okay? Now, it will provide an error at a high level, okay? So SMQ2, on the other hand, again, is the first line of defense, but this is an exists both in ECC and APO, but this is with data that is arriving to the target system, okay? So that's the difference. And it also will provide the error at a high level. Okay, so first transaction you should go into, if you see data that is not flowing, I will go to SMQ1, SMQ2. Next transaction, CFG1, which is in ERP and ECC. This is what we call the application log. Okay, this provides additional details on the actual CIF, and this is between the communication between ECC and APO. You have different message types. I would definitely concentrate on the error, because the error is mostly when the data is not flowing. Now, one of the things that you definitely want to do, if I make one recommendation, is that see here on the left-hand side where it says from date to date, you got to be sure that you enter a value there that is close to when the data stopped flowing. So if you try to send, say, a sales order from ECC to APO today at 3:48 p.m., then what I will try to do is go to the CIF, put in today's date, put in 3:47, and then put in 3:49, right? Because you want to be able to narrow it as much as you can, because this is there's a lot of data on this transaction. So if you leave it wide open, it can time out. Okay, so on the APO side, you have the same transaction. This is the transaction code. It's called C3. And it provides the same functionality that it provides on the ECC side. So the same thing applies. Okay. Another transaction that you have available is what we call the CQ. This is the queue manager. This actually combines SMQ1, SMQ2, and C3 into one. So basically, you can go into transaction. If you have a specific hard error, now this hard error is tied to transactional data only, not master data, but transactional data only, then you can go into this transaction, and then from there, it'll serve you as a gateway to either SMQ1, SMQ2, or C3. What I like about this transaction is that I can go ahead and narrow it down by a specific transactional data type. So I can say I only want to see shipments, I only want to see sales orders, and so on. So this is kind of what it looks like, right? So once you go in it, you'll see, okay, well, going into the APO system, I see that some sales orders are having trouble integrating. Now, here is when I tell you that if you do have a CIF role, that it has to be technical. And I don't mean that this person has to know ABAP, which if you look at the error text, it does say ABAP, but that at least is savvy enough to send it to the right person. A lot of times, these errors can be basis related. It could be an issue that certain table has maxed out, but as a functional user, you may not know that right away. So you need to be able to have somebody from basis who's also in charge or partially in charge of CIF-related issues. Yeah. So anyway, so this is back to the queue manager. Another transaction that we have is called the CPP. This is a CIF Post-Processing, and this is used to display and also process records that are automatically generated during the CIF error handling. Again, it's restricted to the transactional data. You can filter by order category. And one of the ways that this transaction gets populated is when you try also to process something in the CCR report, which we haven't talked about yet, but it's very important. We're going to talk to on next. Okay, so once you go into CIF Post-Processing, it basically breaks it down in this manner. On the left-hand side, you'll see data that is basically stuck between APO to ECC, and then on the bottom, you'll see ECC to APO. It'll break it down by the type of object, the type of transactional data. So external procurement will be anything related to POP recs. In-house production, that will be anything related to plan order, process order. You can double click on that, and then on the right-hand side, then the table will show you all the materials and all the orders that are at that point in time getting stuck in the CIF. You can click on them and you try to process them. If the error still exists, you won't be able to process them, but a lot of times you're able to access that application log directly from this transaction, which really helps because then you don't have to go to C3 and try to find it yourself. You can go directly here, and then it will take you directly to the application log. But you have to be sure that the monitoring is on, and a lot of times they turn it off because of performance purposes. Okay. Okay, some of the best practices around some of the transactions. We talked about integration model fails to activate, view some of the tickets that I just showed you. Again, errors are, most of the time, they're not intuitive. So a lot of times what you can do is search notes. What I've done in the past, when you get an error message, you actually see an error message. You can cut and paste that error message and put it in notes. And a lot of times they will come back with the actual error because, believe it or not, hundreds of people had probably the same error before you did, right? So there are solutions out there. Again, the advantage of the diversification of the integration models. We haven't talked about the software, but you got to use the cockpit for additional help, which we're going to go over next. Also, first round, run the specific models if you want to do a full activation in the background to save time. Don't worry about this one since we're not at the SAP Insider website now. Should have taken that one away, sorry. Okay, here we go. Transactional data reconciliations, another thing that you can do for troubleshooting orders that are missing even if you see an APO. Always, and this is just a best practice. What you should do is run OM17, right, which is a consistency check. Always try to do that daily. Access CCR report. CCR report is basically a report that checks that both systems, ECC and APO, are consistent from a transaction data perspective. If you have an issue, it will show in this report. It will give you details of the actual error, and it will give you option to transfer the data, and also has filtering capability. Okay, transactional data reconciliation from CCR report basically looks like this. If you used it before, you define your partner system. The partner system in this case will be ECC. You define your material, your plant, and then here you say which transaction data object you want to try to check to see if the data is consistent. Once you're in it, it'll tell you, okay, so you have purchase orders that are missing an APO. You can click on the missing APO orders. They will tell you the order number, and then you have an error code. You can double click on the error code, and it will tell you different type of error codes. Again, it's not very intuitive a lot of the times. Some of the times they are. So make sure you pay attention to it. And again, see that message number below where it says CIF 181. These are the message number that I recommend you put in notes because a lot of times they will come back with a source of the error. Okay. Once the error has been corrected, then the data can be retransferred back to ECC. If it still shows and it doesn't transfer, then it will still show in CCR report, and it will still show on the CPP report, the one that we saw beforehand. Okay, now let's talk a little bit, and I know that I only got 5 minutes. The last section, user exits, are basically just a list of user exits I wanted to show you. So let's just spend the last 5 minutes on the cockpit, because this is a transaction that not a lot of people use, but I hope that you guys are using. And that do use after this meeting. So what is the CIF Cockpit? This is a transaction that centrally monitors the data transfer between APO and ECC. It resides on the APO side, yeah, it's transaction CC. Big advantage to me is it's a cross-system and cross-client overview all in one transaction. It's divided both into what we call monitoring and settings, okay? So from a monitoring perspective, you have your CIF background jobs are displayed, right? So, for example, if you have the stop and start job that you would usually activate when you do planning. A lot of clients don't want transaction data to be moving back and forth where planning is happening in APO, so they will stop the CIF so that data doesn't flow, and then after the planning is done, they will restart the CIF for data to replan again. You can also see the application log, CFG1. You can access it directly from the CIF Cockpit, as well as the SMQ1, SMQ2. You can drill down directly from the CIF Cockpit. The CPP report, right? If you have errors, you can drill down directly into the CPP report from the CIF Cockpit. The CCR report as well. If you have errors, you can save the results in the CCR report and then go into CIF Cockpit and view them directly and drill down directly from there. Another thing that you can do, which is very important, is you can do the settings, right? So you can see the actual setting. So a lot of users don't have access to the CIF settings for the transaction itself, but through the CIF Cockpit, you can able to kind of like look at them through a window, right? So in this case, I'm able to see my publishing parameters, right? It'll tell me what is the actual block size, right, when it's trying to send data between ECC and APO from the transaction perspective. So what that means is that, for example, for PO and PRX, I have a block size of 5,000. So that means that when it's trying to send data over, it tries to send in blocks to 5,000, right? If you think that's too much or too little, then you can work on getting that reduced. Another thing that's very interesting is that you're able to see what enhancements related to the CIF are actually active and what are inactive as well. And this is super important and useful because let's just say, for example, that you have sales orders that are not flowing between those systems. Well, I can go here and then say, wait a second, I do have a sales order enhancement that is active. Let me deactivate that enhancement. If you deactivate the enhancement and then data starts flowing again, then at least you have a pretty good certainty that it may be something related to that enhancement, right? So another thing to take into consideration, it also tells you which integration models are active. At the same time, again, from a setting perspective, remember the CFC9 transaction? You don't have to go to ECC. You can see directly within APO what are the settings of the CFC9 transaction. And then this one is also very interesting too. You can actually see the performance, and what that means is that you can define this. It's configurable. I can see by hour, or I could see it by day or by minutes if I wanted to. What are the number of actual objects that are going through on each specific time period, right? So I could say, oh, wait a second. So how many of these specific, orders are actually coming in at 10 a.m., right? So you can actually see, depending on the time of the day, what's the performance load on the CIF. Now, you need to have this active through transaction ACT, and that's usually a basis transaction, so you need to work with them in getting that activated. All right. Well, I went quickly, but hopefully that served you some purpose if you haven't used the cockpit yet. Okay. So we're going to wrap up here on user exits. At least I want to show you, and again, I don't think we're sending out this particular presentation, but if you want at least a comprehensive list of all the user exits and customer exits that are available for both ECC and APO tied to the CIF, let me know and we'll send this to you. There's a lot of them. I think we got probably about 80%, 80 to 90% of what's available. Yeah. So you can see here, you can divide them both on the ECC and APO side. One thing to understand is that when you make an enhancement on the CIF, is that you need to have the enhancement be done on both sides, right? That enhancement needs to be active on the ECC side, and it also needs to be active on the APO side. And then another thing to be cognizant of is that if you make changes in such a way that it could impact the CCR delta report, right? So let's just say you're changing dates of a specific order because for X reason you want to extend the lead time. Well, unless the CCR knows about it, it may flag it as an inconsistency. So you got to work with your developer in making sure that the exit for a CCR report will not trigger that as an inconsistency as well. Okay? All right, we're 4:01, so we're going to wrap up here real quick. This 3 transactions are basically a lot of words. That all I mean by this is that it's never too early to start working on CIF-related activities. What do I mean by this? Even if you're in Blueprint, you're not in the system yet, you still want to talk about the CIF. You still want to talk about what your CIF strategy is going to be, right? How are we going to break up the data, right? Are we going to do real-time versus, are we going to do real-time versus not real-time? How many integration models are we going to have? If the CIF goes down, what's going to be our recovery strategy, right? There's a lot of questions that can be answered even before you get into the CIF, right? Even you get into the system, right? Identify how many, user exits you may use based on your requirements, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can do before you get into the system. I'm not a big fan of just saying, go to this note, but this note actually is a very extremely useful note, which is 563.806. This note is actually updated regularly, so whatever there's frequent questions regarding the CIF, then this is a note that you want to take a look into. Here are some of the documents that we have outside of the presentation. So if you want a connectivity guide or application guide, let me know, let Megan know, we'll send it to you, okay? This is 7 key points to take home, and this is something that we do as basically a day insider. And all it is what we talked about, right? Segregate the models, never have data objects more than one integration model. You can, read through those since we're getting short on time. Let me say one last thing though. A lot of people say, with the new stuff that's coming in, with HANA and, with PPDS, becoming part of ERP at some point in time, isn't the CIF going to go away? The long-term answer is yes, the CIF will eventually go away. But what we need to realize is that it's not going to go away right away. I mean, I see 5, 6 years, bare minimum, where we're still going to have to deal with the CIF, right? And especially if you work in a client that is not going to upgrade right away with the latest and greatest of what SAP may have to offer, you're still going to have to use the CIF, right? So as much as we want to get rid of it, I don't foresee that it's going to go away anytime soon, at least until, they just said SAP APO is going to be supported through 2020. So I would say 2020 is the very minimum. So, all right, so that's all I have. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful. I know I went over by 4 minutes, but now we'll take some questions. All right, Megan.
Yeah, if you want to use the chat panel here, we can take 1 or 2 questions. I know we're out of time, but if you do have questions, feel free to shoot an email to Claudio. We've got, he's actually written a couple of other blogs about the CIF, so if there's anything that we can answer, definitely shoot him an email there. You can always sign up for future webinars that we have coming up here. We're doing them about every 2 months, so just if you want to keep an eye on our website, the next one that we're doing is Claudio is actually presenting that one as well on the S&P Optimizer, how to approach, manage, and maximize the benefits. We're not going to be sending out the slides for this, but we will have the recording up next week. So if there's a slide that didn't make sense or that you wanted to stop and pause on, you can go to our website and you'll get the direct link to that recording in an email early next week as well. So you'll be able to send it to colleagues if you want to do that, or just go through it again. Definitely keep an eye on the website for upcoming really great content, and then we are active on LinkedIn, Google+, Twitter, and Facebook, so we're pushing out a lot of solid content there. If there are any questions, now is the time to put those in the Q&A channel or send them to Claudio. And if you ever have any general questions, you can always send those to our website as well. Claudio, what were you saying?
No, Megan, I'm going to try because I'm trying to answer this Q&A, but unfortunately my send is grayed out, so I'm going to try to answer them here on the fly. So one of the questions was, what was the transaction code you said about the CIF change pointers for change transfer in SCM 7? Okay, so let me actually go back to it because sometimes you can't remember all the transactions. So let me go back to it so we can show that transaction quickly. And while I find that, I see that one of our attendees is one of my good friends, Christine Bowers. I just want to say hi to Christine. We used to work together at Estée Lauder, so I hope you're doing well, Christine. All right. Okay, hold on. Where am I? I think I passed it. Oh, hold on. One back. Oh, here we go. So the transaction is CFMINCR. It's right there on the bottom. The incremental transfer. Yep. Okay. And I think that's the only one I see. I don't see anything else.
Good deal. Excellent. If there's anything else, shoot us an email. But thanks so much for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.